Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody? I was going to do bonjour, but that's about as much French as I have. So this is my second NANOG in a row. Yeah. And before that, it was 20 years. So I'm going to continue to try to space it out a little. Thanks to the leadership team for inviting me to give the keynote. I see lots of old friends. Everybody looks great, maybe a little bit older, but I see Mr. Norton over here and a few others. And so thanks for having me. It's grown a little bit since I remember. I was saying to Randy Bush that I think the last one I went to, there were 35 people. So it's a touch larger than the last time I remember. So with that, I'm going to give you a little bit of my perspective, and this is sort of the internet, at least my path in the internet. And so left to right, I started out working at a small little lab in Frederick, Maryland, the National Cancer Institute Supercomputer Center. And my good friend of 27 years, Kathy Aronson, pointed out back when I had hair. So that was very nice. I then moved upstream to our internet provider, Sorinet. Sorinet was one of the 7 regionals, NSFnet regionals in the mid-90s, and was there for a few years. Moved up to MCI, started MCI's internet business with a handful of folks, and then moved on to level 3, where again, Kathy pointed out I became a muckety-muck, and I think loosely translated, that means I'm management. So that's me. And I'll give you a little bit, as I was thinking about, gosh, when am I going to talk to a room of 1,000 people, of which 999 are smarter than me? It's kind of daunting. You know, I'm in management. I don't do a whole lot of technical things anymore. But I was trying to think about, okay, what are the challenges that I've seen over the last 20 or so years? And I think that you can sum up the challenges, at least as I've seen them, into 2 buckets. Technical challenges, the ones that we see around scale and cost and growth and all of the things that we talk about with respect to the internet. And then the second bucket, which are really incentive challenges. And these are the hard ones. You know, incentive challenges, you can go and look in economics. There's this notion of willing buyer, willing seller. Everybody heard of that? Well, that's actually an example of when incentives align. And it's been the case, at least for the last many decades around the internet, that it's not always that our incentives align. And whether that's because we're just people, we have business interests that are different, there are political environments that are different, you name it. It's hard to make, the technical ones I'd actually argue are kind of easy. The incentive ones are kind of hard, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I was not sure if I should go through history, but I'm going to try to go through a little bit of history because I think it's important. How many newcomers? 200 and, yeah, how many? Raise your hand. Yeah, so I mean, a quarter of the room is newcomers. For the old folks in the room, this will be boring. You can go to sleep and wake up later on, but I was pointing at Norton for that. I'm going to walk a little bit through a little history and start out with, in '86, I was an intern at the time at that little lab, and the NSFnet melted down. For those that remember, it actually really did melt down. It was unusable during the day. And this really smart guy over here on the right, Van Jacobson, a few other folks, came up with a bunch of different techniques around TCP to fix it, TCP Tahoe, TCP Reno. Is there a TCP UMA? Did I read that right? Is that on the agenda? I mean, there are like 15 different variants now, all to really fix what was a fairly decent technical challenge on the internet at the time. If you really go back and look, what's in place today is largely what was built many, many years ago. A little bit more history, BGP. In the early days, the MILNet, NSFNet, all used the exterior gateway protocol for those that remember. If you remember, there were a few little problems like multi-homing and loop prevention and scale. Three guys, at least two of them went off for a lunch at the IETF in 1989 and came up with the spec for BGP, the famous 3-napkin lunch. Whoa. Wow. All right, I win the award for the best speech. It's poppin' breakers. I mean, come on. Are we good? Evidently, the right side of the room is, or the left side of the room is having a touch of a problem. All right, I'm going to keep going. Is that okay? All right. So three guys go off, Yakov Rector, Tony Lee, Kirk Lougheed, and come up with BGP. And you know what? There's a lot of cool stuff that happened back then. All the IBGP, CIDR work that was done, route reflection, all largely in place today. A technical problem that challenged us, kind of something that was fixed and fixed for the long term. For those that remember, we had it's kind of funny, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. Routers were a big problem way back when. We worried about, well, how many packets could you switch through the processor and the slow path and the fast path, and folks like Dennis Ferguson and a few others went off and did a lot of really cool work around Patricia trees and trinary trees and how to do fast lookup. And then the super high capacity OC48 links came around, and we had to use things like TCAM to be able to even forward in a box. All a technical challenge, great work done, but largely solved once it was tackled. So this part of my job I remember with great kind of trepidation. I remember we were off building network back at MCI, and we literally had no idea how we were going to continue to scale our network 4 months from that point in time. No idea. We did all kinds of crazy things. We put frame relay switches in front of routers to aggregate ports together. We built ATM substrates to be able to offer greater capacity because you couldn't buy a router that would actually plug into an OC12. All kinds of crazy stuff at the time just to continue to scale. This, by the way, was the point in which many of us were breaking internet religion by using things like ATM and frame relay that was thought to be, bad, I guess, at the time is the best word I can think of it. But when you look at what we've built today around MPLS and MPLS-TE, we largely do all the same things. It's just a different technology. So many problems, many technical problems existed, congestion, route propagation, all those things, and they were largely fixed. But we struggled with some. And the first is, so I'd had to do a little bit of research here. A few folks, Dave Cooper helped me do some research here around, well, when did all this IPv6 start? 1993. A quarter of the internet's, of the IPv4 address space was actually used at that time. So it wasn't a lack of foresight. Bradner and Mankin and all those folks, they did great stuff. I personally was a big fan of Tuba at the time, TCP and UDP over big addresses, for those that remember. That one didn't win. V6 did. So what happened? Well, the fact is there wasn't any real incentive. And I love the chart. I guess Tony Hain made this chart up here on the right. It's from NANOG 27, 2002. And there's another one going. The chart is awesome. It talks about early adoption, application porting, ISP adoption, all these things. And the only thing that's right on that chart, and no offense to Tony, is the plus sign. That's the only thing that we've gotten right, is that it's taken a really long time. And why is that? Well, there's no real incentive. There wasn't a real incentive to adopt IPv6. And there was a lot of great work done, NAT, for instance, to prolong the lifespan. And so I would argue that the migration to v6 is just because it lacks an incentive. Security. I used to work for Vint Cerf at MCI, and he and I used to get in this great debate about the most awesome thing about the internet and the most horrible thing is that everything's addressable. And when you really get down to some of the biggest security flaws that there are in the system, it's because of in-band signaling and the fact that everything is addressable. And we saw lots and lots of vulnerabilities at the time, TCP Smurf attacks, man-in-the-middle, all that stuff. How many people have heard of 2600? So I'd say, so for those that can't see, about half of the people in the room. So for the other half that don't know, 2600 is the frequency that a Captain Crunch whistle will blow. And it just so turns out that in the early 70s, the in-band signaling for an AT&T long lines voice switch was capable of being taken over by that tone 2600. And there was this thing called phone phreaking, where people would essentially take over the trunk line and be able to make long-distance phone calls over the phone network by grabbing the signaling. And it really is one of the first, in my opinion, one of the first examples of hacking. And it's around the fact that in-band signaling can be a vulnerability. For those that don't remember, everybody heard of Robert Morris? Very few. So Robert Morris was the author, I think, was he a Cornell student? And the author of really the first internet bug, or internet worm, or whatever you want to say, or internet hack. And it was essentially a piece of software that he had written, and it would go and install itself across all Unix systems and basically melted the internet. I actually was at my intern job at the time and got to see this firsthand and got to be interviewed by the FBI and all kinds of stuff for all that. So that was a pretty interesting time. Now, those vulnerabilities, some of them still exist, but when I look at it, I say, all right, what's the incentive? Whose job is it to fix security? The technology has a bit of an inherent flaw, but is it the consumer or the enterprise or providers to fix security? Interconnection. This is a bit of a, I'm going to try to, by the way, all of these are my own opinions, not those of my company, so I need to, I'll make sure I say that first. Interconnection has and will be a problem for the internet as well as many other industries. You can go back to the railroads, and there were interconnection fights between the railroads. If you go back in your telephone history, there's something called the Kingsbury Commitment, and Kingsbury was a judge, and at the time AT&T had to make a commitment to interconnect to all of the phone providers in the early 1900s. We fixed all the interconnection technology problems. We came up things like MEDS and longest exit, shortest exit, all of those things, route servers, route reflectors, all those things, route registries. But at times we ran into incentive problems. And I was thinking, a guy named Scott Huddle and I wrote a paper in the 90s around content and whose job was it to carry content. And the example in the paper was War and Peace. Think about that. We're talking about a book, a big voluminous book rather than today a 4K movie or a UHD movie. So the dynamic has changed a little bit, but the incentive problem is still there. So what do we worry about today? We worry about really cool things like space and power. And if you look at the top, those are copper cables on the left. If you go into one of our gateways, you see that one of our biggest physical problems today is the weight of the actual cables that sit up in the trays above the racks. Because equipment is getting so dense, the watts per gig, just total power power per square foot is increasing so much that actually getting the power to the equipment is tough. So there's all kinds of technology like 380 volt technology. Looks really promising. A little bit of a health and safety issue, but we'll probably overcome that. But we're really, this is something we worry a lot today about. So fiber. I don't know, has anybody ever come to NANOG and talked about fiber? Oh, okay, all right. I thought, oh man, I was hoping I was going to be one of the first. So fiber, it's a really integral part of all of what we do, right? And in the 90s, actually in the 80s, when fiber technology was first being deployed, it was direct buried into the ground. Probably the greatest technology advancement in the 90s was putting plastic pipes in the ground so you could actually pull more fiber. Not too revolutionary, but you'd be surprised how much fiber is actually in the ground that's not in conduit. If you looked at fiber in the early 90s, it was drawn from this thing called a preform. If you actually had that fiber, you had a little problem because the way it was drawn, it wasn't perfectly round, and it had all kinds of impairments because of that. Post-94, there's lots of new fiber and technology like non-zero dispersion shifted fiber came into play. And when we were starting our company, we thought, well, geez, we've seen one new generation of fiber already in 10 years. What happens if there are more and more fibers, or more and more fiber technology, hence the plastic pipes? So here's what's happened in the last 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. State of the art in 2000 was a fiber called LEAF. It basically was a large effective area fiber. It was better than SMF because of all sorts of things like the dispersion compensation. And what's happened is that electronics have caught up. And now we use things like special modulation and special detection to be able to get rid of the impairments in fiber. What we've really done, though, what we've seen is that fiber loss has improved dramatically. The actual size of fiber has improved. And if you look over there on the right, it's kind of small, but in '98, our fiber was about 0.25 dB per kilometer. Today, it's about 0.17, which is about a 40% improvement in loss. So when we use new fiber today, we will use this type of fiber. Bigger core, all that means is that things like 100 gig, things like 200 gig, 400 gig, when you actually go and want to use that technology, you're going to need this type of fiber. Oops, sorry. 100 gig. Hey, so can you see the picture? That's during a maintenance, by the way. That's not how it really looks every day, in case you're one of our customers. I promise. But we got great at ECMP and lag. And today we have 110 gig links between cities in our IP backbone. It's gotten pretty difficult. And things like 100 gig, we got really lucky in this last step in technology. In telecom, it used to be OC3 to OC12, OC12 to OC48, OC48 to 10 gig, all kind of 4x jumps in technology and capacity. Today, we're experiencing a 10x jump, which is awesome. So when you look at that fiber tray there, that's the result of the hundreds of 10 gig links hopefully in a reduction by 10. And we think that 200 and 400 gig is pretty much on the horizon. It's still got some issues around reach, but we're pretty excited about this. And so is our fiber tray. Although our fiber tray vendor is probably not very happy about it. So we don't worry a lot about this anymore. As I mentioned, we spent a lot of time worrying about how do we grow our network just 4 months from now, 20 years ago. Today, we have tons of tricks. Three-stage cost matrix. It's something that we, as well as many other folks, have built, all because we need more fan out. And so these types of architectures are ones that let you have more fan out. Spine leaf is another one, a little bit other arguments for that. But frankly, between the two, we don't worry a lot about how to scale the infrastructure from this perspective, from an actual box perspective. Here's what I do worry about. And it's hard to see on the left-hand side of the chart here. But if you just follow the color, so blue is router capacity, and orange is transporter, WDM capacity. And in '98, routers, generally speaking, gross generalization, were much, much less dense than WDM gear. So play that forward. That's an 8x difference, by the way. Play that forward through the years, and in about 2013 or so, suddenly routers are becoming much more dense than WDM gear. And today, there are many, and for the WDM vendors that are here in this room, they're going to tackle me when I leave. Just relax. I'm sure somebody's got some God box that's coming that is much bigger than 8 terabits, but generally speaking, we know the market. Today, routers are much, much more dense than WDM gear. So now we don't worry a lot about it. We have a ton of fiber. But the industry is going to have to worry about it because we're going to be able to buy these incredibly dense routers, and yet we're still going to have to slap them together with much, much less dense WDM gear, which I think will become a problem for us. Control and automation. Hey, I wouldn't be doing my job as management if I didn't have at least 1 or 2 buzzwords, SDN, NFV, yeah, I said it. Actually, I don't care a lot about SDN. I care a lot about automation of control, getting less and less human touch to our network. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of devices, and managing them is difficult. And so the more and more automation that we can get will help us be better. We do think that NFV has some interesting things, but frankly, we're still a little bit questioning some of the economics. Interconnection. So today, what do we worry about today about interconnection? Hey, we've got the awesome US Open Internet order. I know everyone in the room's a big fan. What do you think? No? Okay. Well, I'll give you my opinion. I think we needed some help. And I don't always love this kind of help, but I think we needed some help. So we got some help. We'll see how that plays out. There is another internet order right now being reviewed in the EU. We'll see what happens. The dynamics of peering are definitely changing. There's no question. And there's more and more press about it. I was talking to someone last night talking about it's hit mainstream when John Oliver can do an awesome explanation of the issue around net neutrality. We have lots of ways to measure ratios, bit miles, longest exit. There are a bunch of ways for us to deal with interconnection. But frankly, I'd say that even today, interconnection still suffers, maybe not as much in the US, but certainly around the world. And again, back to incentives. What are the incentives for us to fix interconnection in the long run? Security. It's gone from the exuberant geek to actually business. And you know, organized crime, nation states, you guys have all read about this. You can actually buy a botnet using your Bitcoins or your Visa account, whichever you'd like, and you can go attack whoever you want. And it's very automated, it's really nice. It turns out that it's gotten kind of mainstream. And if you take a step back and think, well, what happens when this sort of Internet of Things, 50 billion, 100 billion devices is actually connected? And that becomes the footprint in which we need to worry about security. It's a fairly big problem, I think, headed for us. Again, though, whose job is it to fix it? What's the incentive? V4, we all know Aaron's out of addresses. There's a growing secondary market for IPv4. We'll see what happens there. Adoption is beginning to happen. You know, I would say hats off to the cable folks and mobile operators. I think they've done a really fabulous job with adoption of V6. So we're starting to see it. Traffic has grown 100% for us in the last year. Still a barrier. Still, frankly, I question what the incentive really is. I mean, when we run out of addresses, that'll be when you really can't get any addresses, that will be the ultimate incentive. But we still will struggle a little bit. But I do think we're making good progress. Facebook said that 50% of all mobile devices are delivered over IPv6 now. So our industry continues to solve the technology challenges. And as a technology guy, I always love it when I hear we're about ready to hit the laws of physics, or we're going to get to Shannon's limit, or there are lots of other engineering technical things that people will say that we're just about ready to run out. And the great thing about technology is we almost always figure out a way. And if you look at optics or routing or pick your technology, I would argue that we almost always find a way. And I'd never bet against it. But what I worry about for the future is, and this is so embarrassing to say, the most obvious statement in the world is that everything can be carried over IP. Every single piece, every single kind of communications can be carried over IP. And you might say, well, yeah, no kidding. Just 17 years ago, I sat in a conference room arguing with folks that we were trying to get to give us money, that we could carry phone calls over IP. Today, Netflix is delivering 4K over the internet. I would challenge you to name one thing that we actually can't carry over IP. The issue, well, I left myself one out. There's no time bound here, so I'm not picking a date. I'm not coming up with another chart that has pluses on it. And I'm not saying whether it's public or private, because I'm not sure. I think it could all be public. The question is whether we can fix all the incentive challenges: security, interconnection, adoption. With that, thank you very much. Am I supposed to take questions? I am supposed to take questions or comments, so.
If anyone has questions, any questions on Jack's experience, his vision, his thoughts for the future? I think maybe one's coming, maybe more than one. Okay, from the back, Mike.
Sandy Murphy Parsons. I have a particular security focus in the work that I do, so I was struck by your list. I agree with all of them. You got down to the bottom and said, but this is a hard problem. Whose job is it to fix it? Help where do you see the engineering community's role in establishing standards when the incentives that you have rightly noted are not there? How do the people who see an engineering solution get wheels under it, under the financial and legal and political and social problems?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not sure I know the answer other than I'd say it'll probably just take a few more Home Depot, Target, Sonys to make every board, every public board of every public company have to deal with this. What we've done from our company's perspective is we actually have a committee on our board of directors that focuses on security and where we invest and how we're protecting ourselves and the products and services that we're selling, as well as our compliance. So I think the first answer is awareness. And if you're in a company, I'd encourage you that awareness is a huge gap, and companies really struggle with it.
So going for broke here, you mentioned prefix hijacking and AS origin authenticity, and I'm Sandra Murphy, the co-chair of the CIDR working group in the IETF. So I would love to discuss with you the problem of security in that realm and your committee's interest and awareness and position.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
There's someone at the left.
Hi, my name is Jacques Latour. I'm the CTO for .ca. And like you know, CTO, you need to build a vision of the future and where we want to be and all that. And one thing that's driving me nuts is IPv4. It's done, right? We need to set a date collectively when we shut it off. I can't go on forever. We need to go to V6. And if we want to wait for it to die naturally, it will never die naturally. So we have to pick a date and make it happen. So what's your thought on that? I know it's a bit, people here want to keep IPv4 forever. I don't know why, but we need to move on.
I mean, I don't know if I completely agree. I think that we'll have both for at least as long as I'm breathing. So I think that it's really hard to say that there will be a flag day in which we turn off the v4 address space. But I do think that scarcity is going to become the biggest issue, will become. I don't know if I think that there's ever going to be a day where I believe that we shut off v4 personally.
All right, thanks.
Jack?
Center mic.
Dave Temkin, Netflix. So if you look back to when you started, you really could look at the US as the quote-unquote center of the internet, right? And back through all the permutations and iterations that we've had. Now we're in a world where we have growing globalization. We've got submarine cables that are being built with the express purpose of bypassing the US. And so how do you think that impacts the level 3 business and the internet as a whole as we get taken out of more or less the hub, if you will, of the internet, and it truly becomes a global network with China and India actively participating?
Yeah, I mean, and this is frankly exactly why we have our committee on our board of directors, and you might say, well, how the hell is that connected? The problem is that you can't act as a U.S. company. We operate in 100 countries around the world, and we have to abide by local law, and that means everything from information collection to you know, all the subpoena rights and takedown rights and all those things. We have to operate in each country as if, you know, that's where we got our license. And so it's really had to change our thinking as a management team as to how we operate and become much US centric and more global. You know, it's tough, right? Because I think that things like the interconnection rules, we have some promise that or some probability that that the interconnection rules in the US might look similar to what they look to the EU. I think it probably stops there. And there are so many different incentive challenges, back to that, in different parts of the world where governments are protecting their PTTs, or there are different ownership rights, where, I mean, we don't own our own network in China for exactly this reason, because you know, we struggle with ownership and putting money in the ground and not being able to get it back out. So we really struggle with some parts of the world right now, but it's a great question.
Thanks.
Over there.
Hi, Carl Klatsky, Comcast. Back to the IPv4, IPv6 discussion. Over the years of the transition to IPv6, we've seen the proposals come up. If you call back in the classful IPv4 definition for the Class E range of addresses, do you ever see that opening up, or if any of the proposals get any traction on that as, you know, another patch workaround on IPv4?
I don't know. I think that we're reaching the point where the law of large numbers takes over for any sort of tweak we can do to Class D address space and all that. I think that's on the margin. If there really are 50 billion, 100 billion connected devices eventually that all need to be reachable, I don't think any of those proposals, I mean, they're fine workaround, they're fine things to add on some life, but I think if you really believe that there are that many devices coming, and I personally do, I think it's horses out of the barn, then I think all of those are kind of at the margin.
Thanks.
Jeff Houston, APNIC. You and I have both been around this industry for about the last 30-odd years. When both of us started, the problem was the telcos, and the answer realistically was this end-to-end architecture that pushed control, functionality and value out of the network across into the end systems. Yet you're working for a carriage company. And somehow the telcos refuse to die. They continue to try and pack complexity and what they think is value into the network despite the end systems. And sometimes it looks like carriage is the problem still, and we still haven't quite got over it. What do you think about your future in your carriage business? Are you willing to embrace commoditization, or do you still think there's a dollar to be squeezed out of moving bits?
Well, I hope there is for at least 10 more years, Jeff.
10 years, okay.
You know, so I struggle with a little bit of that, as you probably know, because I do think, at least from our perspective, we aren't a carriage company, and we didn't start with 100 years and a government granted monopoly. So, you know, we started the old-fashioned way, $1 at a time, and with the focus around building something that had long, long, long optionality. And so from the plastic pipes in the ground to the fiber to looking at technology in a very different way. I mean, we thought, I mean, we were called crazy, and I know it seems silly to say now, but we built a network and a company completely optimized around internet technology. I mean, today everybody would go, no crap. Yeah, I mean, that's what you would do. But back then, that was unheard of. So I think, at least from my perspective, we've approached it very differently. You're going to get me on a bit of a rant around the cloud, right? Because there are like raindrops in the cloud, right? There's stuff inside the cloud, and we're the stuff, and many of us in the room are the stuff inside the cloud. So I think that carriage is incredibly important to get from the end systems. And you could argue whether the value exchange has been exactly, I'm a free market guy, so the value exchange is what the market will bear. But I very much believe that carriage is important and will continue to be important.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Zignoni from LinkedIn. You mentioned security, and usually in the context of cyber attacks. How about the fiber that's been getting cut in the US in 2015?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for those that have been reading the paper, we, as well as many others, have suffered a little bit on the vandalism side, especially in Northern California. It's public. There are parts that we can't talk about. But, I think part of the vulnerability of the system is the fact that we can't have the armed guards running around 186,000 miles of fiber, and so there is some natural vulnerability to physical infrastructure. We work hard at trying to protect it. Eventually, you can't. If there are bad people, that you can't do a lot about that. But I think that it's a testament to the survivability of the technology, and the fact that we've suffered, as you mentioned, some of those things. We still, service has if you look at the total system, has largely been resilient, and so it's a concern. It's a concern. There's no question. And frankly, there are harder parts to operate. Go down to Latin America, and not because of vandalism, but because of just construction and economic development. It's a tough place to operate. So we see that a lot.
Any more last questions? Okay.
Well, listen, thank you very much, and have a great week.